Well, what have you just put on your head?
Yeah,
well, actually, no, I'll rephrase that. What have you just put on your head?
There's widespread anger at an announcement that popular BBC podcast, fortunately, is going to be made exclusive to BBC Sounds, the broadcaster's new audio app. It means that the podcast, which isn't aired on radio, will no longer be available on other services like Apple Podcasts or Google Podcasts. There's concern that because the BBC Sounds app is unavailable outside the UK, overseas listeners may not be able to listen. Fortunately, it isn't as bad as it seems. The BBC tells us that this is part of an exclusivity trial for BBC Sounds and only affects the first 4 episodes this season. The programme will also be released on the BBC iPlayer radio app, which is still available worldwide. All 4 episodes will be released on all platforms too, after a 30-day window. Notwithstanding this, listener reaction is predictably fierce. Responses include the arrogance of the BBC is breathtaking, and that the decision is bonkers. Not good bonkers, bad bonkers. The app has also been poorly reviewed. Now, as a side note, the BBC monetises its podcast listening outside the UK with Acast, so exclusivity also removes revenue for the corporation. And Podnews estimates that the BBC is the world's second largest podcaster after NPR. Meanwhile, Spotify is planning more exclusive podcasts on their platform, reports TechCrunch at CES. According to the company, podcasters who joined Spotify exclusively were actually able to grow their audience despite leaving other distribution platforms. For example, the Joe Budden podcast had its highest streaming day ever after joining Spotify. The On Air Fest, February the 28th to March the 3rd in Brooklyn in New York, is inviting artists and storytellers to spend 5 nights at the Wythe Hotel as part of the On Air Fest residency. The deadline to apply is January the 17th. You'll find a link to that in our newsletter and in the show notes. Earlier this week, we reported that Apple's AirPlay 2, which is vaguely similar to Google's Chromecast, is coming to new Samsung televisions. It's also going to be seen on televisions from Sony, LG and Vizio. Podchaser have posted their 2019 roadmap and 2018 review. The plans include better discovery, integrations with other platforms and revenue, including merchandise. Yesterday, we linked to US radio's top advertisers on a website called Inside Radio. Now, that website doesn't work in Europe, for which our apologies. We link to what you missed today in our newsletter and in our show notes. Vocalcast is a new podcast aggregator hoping to organise sports podcasts. They tell Podnews our process allows us to comb through thousands of podcast episodes every day to identify and rank those belonging to the major sports disciplines. In contrast, Apple Podcasts has 4 US-leaning sports subcategories. The first 6 teams have been picked for the Google Podcasts and PRX Creator Program. Congratulations to them. Free podcast host Zcast, or is it Zcast? Anyway, we don't need to worry anymore because they're to close. They've given podcasters just 3 weeks to find alternative hosts. Is there an issue with podcast discoverability? One survey says yes. It's a survey conducted by the podcast host. It got 212 responses. The New York Festivals and Awards ceremony is now open for entries. 2019 includes more podcast categories. Spreaker has released a new version of its newsletter, which promises bite-sized news that'll take less than 3 minutes of your time. That sounds great, if vaguely familiar. And Ear Hustle is looking for a part-time content producer based in Emeryville in California and also in San Quentin State Prison.